It is so good to see everybody. My name's Rosie. I'm the events coordinator here at Readers. Last time we had Suzanne here was for her book, The Cardinal Club, which is a wonderful, very interesting and brave memoir that she wrote. Of course, she wrote it, and it was published, and we had her out, and it was the 17th of March, 2020. And I remember this very distinctly because it was the 18th of March, 2020, when we were told we weren't allowed anyone in the bookstore at all, and go home and lock the doors. And it's so nice to have her back, and it's so nice to have people back in the store. It's just this heartwarming feeling. And especially a really good book for starting off, because life is about journeys, and life is about pilgrimages in many ways. But before she turned 60, she took an actual pilgrimage, and I think that's a wonderful and brave story to do, and a just remarkable journey. Now I've said journey 16 times now, but that's what this is. So if you could give her a really big round of applause, we'll get going. Thank you.
I am so excited to see so many people here. This is really awesome. And as Rosie said, it really was bizarre the last time. We had inklings that something was afoot, and I think it affected turnout that night, and then the next day, of course, we all locked down. And so I had this long series of book tour events planned, and none of them happened. And then I released this book again. We were still in the pandemic, and I thought, what kind of an idiot releases 2 books in the middle of a pandemic? But we didn't know that it was going to last so long. So here we are, and I'm glad we could get together today. And thank you very much for coming. So my name is Suzanne Maggio. A little bit about me. I'm a psychology instructor at the JC and at Sonoma State. I'm a social worker, and I am a Sonoma County resident. I live over in the Pengrove area. So this area is near and dear to my home. I spend a lot of time in Sonoma because we have very dear friends that live here. So I want to talk a little bit about the book. For those of you that don't know, I'll tell you a little bit about the Camino. The Camino is a 799 kilometer walk across the north of Spain, the Camino Frances. Now there's a number of different Caminos, or a number of different paths. There's several that go through Portugal. There's a couple of them that go through other parts in the north of Spain. But the Camino Frances is sort of the one everybody knows about. It's the one that Martin Sheen takes in the movie The Way. It's believed to be one of the first ones that was walked when the ancient pilgrims from many, many years ago took that journey to Santiago. And that's the one that I decided to walk one afternoon in October, just as I was facing my 60th birthday. And I remember it like, it's just one of those things that slip out of your mouth. I said to my husband, I want to walk the Camino. Now, I had some motivation. I had a little bit of inspiration from Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the wonderful book Wild. And I had read her book, and I went to see the movie, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. I want to do something like that. I want an adventure. And then I thought, yeah, I don't really want to sleep on the ground for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And so then we watched The Way. Now, I've seen The Way. I have to say, I've probably seen it a dozen times. I love the movie. Having walked the Camino, there's a lot of Hollywood in that movie, and if you walk the Camino and you watch The Way you go, that's not there. That happens after that, and it's all kind of mixed together to make this wonderful film, but it still is a wonderful film. And I think it was after that I made those fateful remarks to my husband, I think I want to walk the Camino, and he looked at me and he said, have fun. My husband is not a walker. I tell this story in the book that we have had many fights as he drives around the parking lot looking for the closest spot to the door, right, at the grocery store. And I'm like, just park. It's not that far. But he doesn't like to walk. So I was definitely doing this on my own. And so that's how it started. One day I just said, okay, I'm going to do it. And once I said it out loud, then I was on my way. So it's a 799 kilometer walk across the north of Spain. That's roughly 500 miles. And it's 500 miles of walking probably anywhere between 15 to 18 miles a day, every day, for about a month. That's about how long it takes. Now, some people go slower, right? I was walking the first couple of days with a group of nuns who had walked multiple times, and they were walking much slower, right? They were, maybe doing 7 to 8 miles a day as opposed to 15 to 18 miles a day. But I'm a rule follower. I'm a pretty structured person, and the guidebook said that you walk 18 miles on Monday, and then on Tuesday you walk 15 miles, and on Wednesday you walk 16 miles, and that's what I did. I followed the book the way the book kind of told me to do it. But you walk one step at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 day at a time. The journey itself is a pilgrimage. It was created of a walk to Santiago to visit where the bones of St. James is supposed to have been buried. Who knows if they're really there, but that's sort of the story. In the cathedral, and many people, many religious people. I walked with lots of priests and lots of nuns and lots of people who were saying the rosary as they walk for with a spiritual intent. That was not my intent when I started. I didn't put that together. I mean, I knew it was a pilgrimage, but I don't think I understood what that would actually mean. For me, it was more of an adventure. For me, I was about to turn 60, and I wanted to do something that was going to be remarkable and would give me a chance to accomplish something that was big, to mark this big moment in my life.
What year did you go?
I walked in 2019. So in May of 2019, I started. It was Memorial Day weekend, and I arrived in Santiago on July 1st. So it took me just about 31 days. It took me 1 day longer than many of the people I was walking with, because I spent an extra day in Leon, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But I carried my stuff on my back. When you go, there are kind of 2 ways to go. You can pack a pack full of stuff that they tell you about, 10% of your body weight. So, for me, that was about 18 pounds. I think my pack was about 20 pounds with water. And I carried it the whole way. There are other people that go with suitcases, or they carry a pack and they take the pack and someone carries it or drives it from point A to point B. I didn't do that. And I say that proudly. I was someone who carried my stuff, and I teased my friends who sent their bags on, but there really is nothing wrong with sending your bag on. It's just not the way that I wanted to do it. And at night, we would spend the night in albergues, and the albergues are like hostels. Some of them are very nice. Some of them have they look more like a house with a bunch of different rooms in it, and maybe there are 4 or 5 people in a room. And then there are other ones where you go in and they're like these large cavernous rooms where there are rows and rows of bunk beds, right? And those were my least favorite, because those are the ones you didn't get a lot of sleep in. You had a lot of people snoring, and it usually didn't smell that great because, there are a lot of people in that room. And then every now and then I stayed in a hotel, just because I could, and I needed it. And usually I went to the hotel when I needed to be able to shower with a real towel. That was sort of my thing. If I had this towel that I used that literally looked like a car chamois, and it was, at REI it was called a large towel, and it was about this big, and it did not dry your body. So every now and then I was like, no, I want a real towel that feels soft on my skin, and I'm going to go to a hotel. So I think I did that 2 or 3 times. So let me back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about the book. So this book is, let me say that I did not know that I was going to write a book when I was walking. That was not my intention. I did keep a journal, but I kept a journal. It's a really boring journal. There's actually parts of the journal in the book so people can see what I was actually writing. If you read it, it's like, today we walked 18 miles and we got tortilla and the sun was shining, and it's pretty boring. So it wasn't like I was creating a book as I was walking. I was trying to keep track of what was happening from day to day, because when you're walking for 31 days in a row, the days start to blur and blend into one another, and you can't remember where you are or what you're doing, because it all sort of seems the same. So what happened was, I did this walk. It was an extraordinary walk. So many things happened on the walk that I didn't expect. It ended up being an extraordinary spiritual journey, even though I had not gone with that intent. But I made it to the other end, and I got home, and I was struggling to make sense of what had happened for a long time. People would ask about the trip, and I would show them my pictures, but I felt like the pictures didn't tell the story. And then I would try to explain what had happened, and I felt like the explanation didn't tell the story. And I couldn't figure out why. And so those of you that have walked, I don't know if this sounds familiar, but it's really hard to put into words what happens while you're walking. And so I really started writing as a way to make sense of the journey for me. And what happened for me was that I realized that the way I understood the Camino was that it was these stories of the people that I met along the way. And so this book is not a how-to. It's not a, here's what happened on Tuesday and here's what happened on Wednesday. There are plenty of books like that out there. But this one was really about, what did I learn? What were the things that sort of presented themselves to me as I was walking and beyond when I came home? And how did I sort of make sense of what had just happened? So that's really the impetus for writing this book. So what I think I'll do is, I'll read a little bit of it, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the structure of the book, sort of, and sort of what's in it. This is a short chapter. This is chapter 5. Each chapter is a day. There's not 31 chapters. There are sort of these sort of flashpoints along the journey. And this is day 5, and it's Estrellas, which is one of the first towns that you get to on the Camino, and it's at kilometer 113. So 1 kilometer is about 0.6 miles. So you can kind of see where we are at that point. So this chapter is called First Impressions. I had you pegged as a cougar, Emma said, laughing. She had a broad freckled face and silky blonde hair, and her Irish brogue made the comment seem all the more mischievous. I saw you the first day walking up to Orison with that young Mexican fella. I figured he was your boyfriend. Debbie, Pat, and I stood in the bustling Cafe Mundo, searching the room for an open table. My feet were throbbing, and all I could think about was sitting down. The room was packed with Peregrinos. Across the expanse of tables, Debbie and Pat spotted a few they'd met on the trail. And when a large table opened, we waved them over to join us. You what? I said, as we shuffled our way to the table. You mean David? My cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Oh no, I said, without even pausing for a breath. I just met him that morning. I thought back to that first day. It seemed so long ago. Now, 5 days in, I'd settled into a rhythm. But those first few steps would be forever etched in my memory. It was cool that first morning, and everything was brand spanking new. The canvas on my steel gray pack was spotless, my keens only slightly broken in. I pulled a wool overshirt over my baby blue quick-dry tee and cinched up the tie on my camp shorts. The collapsible hiking poles I bought at an outdoor shop in Barcelona when I had stopped for a few days to visit my friend Elena still had the tags on them. I opened the clasp and extended the shaft, estimating a comfortable length for my 5'4" frame. Those first few steps were awkward. I'd never used hiking poles before, and walking with them felt like when I learned to ski in high school. unsure of how to get everything to move in the same direction. Within minutes of forging my way through the old town gate, scrums of pilgrims began to pass me on the way up that first incline. And that's when I met David, the guy Emma mistook for my boyfriend. David was indeed handsome, with dark brown hair and soulful brown eyes. He was in his early 30s, I guessed. Hola, buen camino, I said, trying out my Spanish as he walked up beside me. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bien, I said. Estoy muy emocionado para comenzar. My morning coffee had kicked in and I was filled with rookie enthusiasm. ¿Hablas español? Un poquito, I said, not wanting to oversell myself. I could hold my own, that was for sure, but despite years of study, I certainly wasn't fluent. I made too many mistakes, confused my tenses, and often grew frustrated with my limited vocabulary. 7 years before, when I'd spent a semester teaching in Barcelona, I'd been reticent to speak, too afraid of making a mistake. I promised myself I was going to use my Spanish this time around. As the path began to climb higher and higher, the paved road gave way to dirt and gravel. I pushed my pace to keep up with my new Camino friend. ¿De dónde estás? I asked. Where are you from? I was in full Spanglish now, speaking Spanish when I was sure and English to avoid looking foolish. Ciudad de Mexico, he said, and then switching to English, but I'm about to move to New York for work. And you? California, I said, but I grew up in New Jersey. Even though I'd lived in California for more than 30 years, I was still a Jersey girl at heart. When are you moving to New York? In the middle of July, he said. I'm meeting a friend in Rome on June 29th, after I finish the Camino, and then I will fly to New York. The 29th? It was June 1st, and almost 500 miles to Santiago. The guidebook said the journey would take anywhere from 30 to 35 days. I couldn't imagine how he was going to finish. I've worked it out with a travel guide in Mexico City who mapped it out for me, he said. I'm going to have some long days, but I think I can do it. As the path continued to climb, we passed a herd of long-haired mountain sheep who seemed undeterred of the constant stream of pilgrims who wandered through the field when they were grazing. David took the climb quickly. His long gait and trim body moved effortlessly, while I worked hard to keep up. As we chatted back and forth, I gasped for breath, my answers growing briefer and briefer as the climb intensified. You all remember that night, I'm sure. That first day was very hard. Still, I was buoyed with the excitement of the moment, of the warmth of the sun on my skin, of the energy of the people around me. David's new job was in the tech industry. Having already left Mexico City, he was eager to start his life in New York. I wondered if he'd been there before. I imagined he was in for a shock if he hadn't. Despite spending a lot of time there as a child, I still found it overwhelming. I have, he said. I've been to New York many times on business. Mexico City is similar in some ways. It's very busy with lots of people and traffic. Having set out alone that morning, I was grateful to have someone to walk those first few kilometers with. Now, Emma's vivid imagination had turned an innocent walk into a surreptitious affair. You stopped to take our picture, Emma said, scrolling through the pictures on her cell phone until she located it. Here. I had to confess, I hadn't even remembered, but there it was. And you know how it is. You see people and you try to guess who they are, what their story is, she joked. I figured you'd left your husband at home and taken up with a younger man. Emma's broad smile filled her freckled face, and her eyes twinkled with a hint of wicked playfulness. You do? I said. It hadn't occurred to me to figure out anyone's backstory just by looking at them. I shook my head in disbelief. If only she knew how un-cougar-like I really was. Well, you're half right, I smiled, starting to feel a little more at ease. I left the husband at home. He's not much for walking. Although Emma's teasing caught me off guard initially, I wasn't altogether unfamiliar with it. I'd always had an affinity for the Irish, having grown up in an Italian household. I had very little exposure to Irish culture. That is, until I found myself in college in Boston, where it seemed like everyone I knew was either Irish or Italian. Now, looking back, I realize that many of my dearest friends were descendants of the people from the country of Guinness and James Joyce. During my 4 years there, I participated in more than my fair share of St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Irish bars were a mainstay of Boston life, and St. Patrick's Day, people poured out of them into the streets, celebrating like there was no tomorrow. I'm a pureblood. My mother's father immigrated from Rome as a young man. On the other side, I'm Sicilian. My paternal grandfather came to the United States as a child from a small village in central Sicily called Santa Margherita di Belice. I was proud of my Italian pedigree. But the purity of our family's Italian lineage would not continue. By the time my mother's brothers married, the integration of the two cultures began. He married a half Italian, half Irish girl. My father's brother married an Irish girl too. Now, several generations later, Irish blood flowed through both sides of my extended family. And as it was in college, today that same rang true. Some of my dearest friends were Irish. They were playful and lighthearted, a strong contrast to the emotional intensity of the Italians I knew. And though we had different temperaments, I considered it to be opposite sides of the same coin. We both valued family, were faithful, hardworking, and deeply spiritual people. As immigrants, our relatives each had their own share of difficulties assimilating into American culture. And like the Italians, most of the Irish I knew were Catholic. At the table we made our introductions. Besides Debbie, Pat, Emma, and I, there were Tim and Jeanette, a couple from Adelaide, Australia, Patrick and Maria, a brother and sister from Florida and California, and Emma's husband, Connor. They were from Dublin. While the rest of us were Camino newbies, Connor and Emma were not. Although they'd never walked all the way through, they'd walked sections of the Camino, including the final 100 kilometers, the popular 5-day stretch from Sarria to Santiago. That was all that was needed to earn the prized Compostela, the certificate that marked the completion of the trail. This time, they planned to walk for 10 days, from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Burgos. The Australians, Tim and Jeanette, only planned to walk as far as Logroño, about 6 days. The rest of us were going all the way. Emma jumped up from the table and returned with a handful of small national flags representing each of our countries. Within minutes, the conversation grew raucous and everyone was laughing. Emma and Connor played off each other with a timing reminiscent of the classic comedy couples I'd grown up with, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira. They had a way of putting everyone else at ease, bantering back and forth with an unabashed teasing that cut through any self-consciousness or timidity that lingered. We rarely saw each other on the trail. We were early risers. Connor and Emma slept in. While Debbie, Pat, and I stayed in pilgrim albergues, Connor and Emma preferred hotel rooms. While we schlepped all of our worldly possessions on our backs, Connor and Emma lived out of suitcases that arrived at their hotel long before they would shuffle in. We spent hours teasing them about it, but Emma was fond of reminding us that everyone walks their own Camino, and this was the way she chose to walk hers. The Irish folk I met that day, in those early days of the Camino, were some of my first friends. Besides Connor and Emma, there were Hugh and Martin, the boys from Limerick, and Irish English John. They seemed to find each other like swarms of honeybees. After a long day of walking, you could find them glommed together in a pub, lifting pints and telling stories. I looked forward to seeing Connor and Emma each day. After a long day of walking, Debbie, Pat, and I would shuffle into the local pub, and there we'd be, sitting at the bar, often flanked by a few of the others. One of the regulars was John, a man Emma dubbed Irish English John, a nod to his Irish heritage. Despite the fact that he now lived in the middle of England, his family hailed from Ireland. Irish English John was tall and fit, with a warm smile and a thick head of gray hair and dark brown eyes. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, and like the other Irish folk, he was easy to talk to. He quickly became a part of our expanding Camino family. It was strange how it happened so quickly on the Camino, this strong connection to people you barely knew, bound together by the experience of walking. With just 5 days behind me, I'd already met so many people. This was part of the reason I wanted to go alone, to open myself up to whatever opportunities might present themselves to me. But as it turned out, I could not anticipate what I would discover. Before I began the journey, my focus had been on the walk itself, the miles under my feet, the mountains I might climb, the strain it would take on my body. And that was all there. But I was quickly learning that the Camino was much more than that. The Camino was about people. That night, as we sat around the table in the back of that little cafe in Estrellas, our Camino family was forming, a series of relationships that would expand and grow all the way to Santiago. So you get a sense of the beginning. And so the book itself then is sort of a way of exploring those relationships. It was as if sort of each person, each of these moments that I talk about in the book, had these they were kind of these significant growth moments for me, and of lessons learned. And when I thought back about the Camino when I got home, what I realized was that the spiritual journey that I didn't know I was going on was in those people and in meeting those people. And actually, when I came back, about a year after I came back, and we were all locked down and there was nowhere to go, I have a very dear friend who's sort of a big philosophical, theological guy. He has a master's degree in world religions and a master's degree in social work like I do, and also a master's degree in philosophy, I think. And the two of us simultaneously were reading a book by Richard Rohr called The Universal Christ. And I don't know if anybody has read that book. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's extraordinary. I was raised Catholic, and so I'm like garden variety Catholic, and Rohr is like as far to the left as you could be without being excommunicated. So he's sort of he's a mystic Catholic. And in the beginning of the book, one of the things he says is he's sort of grappling with what the notion of God is. And he has this sentence in the book, it's like a few words, and he says, God is relationship itself. And all of a sudden I went, oh, that was it. Excuse me. But that was my spiritual aha. On that journey, it was like, I got those people in my life to teach me about relationship. And so it wasn't about the walk. It wasn't about all the stuff I bought at REI. It wasn't about, the beers afterwards, although those were lovely, the beers after hiking all day long. But it was about those people. And those of you who walked know, like, you meet people for like 2 hours, and then they stay with you. So I wanted to say about the experience, like everyone experiences it differently, right? Everybody that walks gets something different out of it. But for me, it was really about just meeting these extraordinary people, sometimes for, half a day, sometimes the whole time. There were people I walked with the whole way. But a lot of the people that really stayed with me were people that I maybe didn't even get their name. It's pretty amazing. One young man, and his story's in the book, was from South Korea. And we were walking together one day, and he was super shy, young guy. He was 20 years old. But I guess in South Korea, he was 21, because in South Korea, you're 1 when you're born. He's 20, and he just got out of the army. And he had been on the front lines of the border of South Korea and North Korea. And so he was talking to me, and this was during the time that Trump was tweeting against Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un was like shooting rockets towards South Korea. And he's telling me this story about how scared he was on the front lines. And he's like 19. And that just struck me. It was just like, these are real people. I mean, and here we are with what's happening in Ukraine, right? These are real people that have lives and families. And he's 19. And the editor that worked with me on the book said, how old do you think people are when they're in the army? And I'm like, I know, but there's something about walking with someone who's 19, you get it differently, right? I got it differently. So that's what the book is about. It's about those relationships and that journey. And you probably won't cry when you read it, so don't be afraid. That's just me. Unless you're Italian, and then you might cry. Questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about, you mentioned the 19-year-old or 20 or whatever.
Yes.
Could you determine like an average age or youngest, oldest? Were you conscious of that?
There were people from little kids walking with their families. There was this whole family that we saw several times that were walking. There was another family that was they were sitting on donkeys, and the parents were taking them across the mountains on donkeys. And little kids, there were people carrying babies. And I walked with a guy who was 85. So everything in between. It was pretty remarkable. I walk with a lot of college kids. You know, I teach college kids, and I like to pretend that I'm closer to their age than I'm not. But, you know, now I've gotten to the point where I start talking about things and they weren't born yet, and I think, oh God, you know, I'm getting old. But it really, it's a wide. One guy that I walked with, who's in the book, Patrick, was 73, and he had a hip replacement, and he was just walking slowly, but he made it.
I went in October, October, and I think when you go determines who you're walking with.
Yes.
Because most of the college kids were back in school, and so most of the people I found myself walking with were my age in our 60s. The other thing that surprised me was the number of women walking by themselves. And I thought, wow, this is really safe. I realized, you know, it's safe, and there was a lot of history. So a lot of it, you know, when you were going and during the summer, it's going to be more younger people because that's when they can get away. But if you time it, the advantage we had is ending in the middle of October. That's when the rain starts, and actually the snow starts. Snow starts in the mountains. So we had pictures when we were in Santiago where back in France it was snowing.
Yeah.
So where we were is now under snow. So my point I'm making is timing is when you go will kind of may dictate the age of the people you're walking with.
Yeah, I think I would say the shoulder seasons are the best seasons to go. The summer it's really hot and it's very crowded. So to go in the early, like late spring, like May, June, or September, October. But people go in the winter and walk in the snow.
Yeah. This is more of a logistic question. I have so many questions I can't ask all of them. But do some people not make it? And how does it happen that? Can you just easily get off when you're ready?
Yeah. So
my daughter's 22 and she's doing it alone in May.
Yeah, I did it alone too, and she'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know, you're not alone. There's no way to be
That's
alone.
what she's super
I mean,
excited
you meet so many people, and I wanted to go alone. I had people that wanted to go with me, and I said no, I want to do it by myself. And I met so many people.
Yeah.
So many people.
Well, you made reference to Debbie and Pat.
Debbie and Pat were a couple that I met one night.
Okay,
Yeah.
I thought they were your travel companions.
No, I met them in one night in Saint-Jean. But so one of the things that was really interesting for me is I did not understand that it's very fluid. So it starts, the Francais starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and ends in Santiago. But people start all throughout it. I mean, there are people that start in Pamplona, there are people that start in Sarria, there are people that start in Astorga. There are people that like Connor and Emma that only walk for 10 days. And so, you know, there's all this coming and going, and I didn't understand that. And so that was, for me, that was hard because you would get to know people and then they would be leaving. And so there's a lot of hellos and goodbyes the whole time. It's a lot like life. I mean, it's a brilliant metaphor for life, really. When you think about it later on, like while you're in it, you're like, no, don't leave. And then what happened to me was I got really bad blisters halfway through, really bad. And like I had blisters on top of blisters. And so those of you that have walked know that there's this, when you finish walking for the day, we all sort of like walk like this, like, because you hardly can move your feet. And they call it the Camino Shuffle. It's actually very funny. But I couldn't because I had blisters on my feet, so I had to walk like this on the edges of my feet. So I had blisters on the balls of my feet, blisters on the heels of my feet. And by the time I got to Lyon, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it. I'm not sure this is going to happen. And so Debbie and Pat decided that my friends were going to stay one night extra in Lyon. I thought, okay, I'll get a hotel and stay an extra day in Lyon. So it sounds like a great idea, right? Except that all the people that I was walking with kept going. So I lost them, and I never walked with them again. And that was really hard for me. I wanted them to stay. You guys are nodding. Do you remember that happening? Yeah. And I wanted them to stay. I was like, oh, please, wouldn't it be so cool? You could spend the night in Lyon. We can go sightseeing. And they were like, yeah, no, we're good. We're going to keep going. And because they were walking, right? And then, there's that. So it's like, it's really interesting. It's very fluid. It's very fluid. And I did not know that going in. Yeah. What else? What other questions or comments or thoughts? Those of you that have walked. Yeah, Francis.
Are you thinking of doing another one?
I am. Well, I'm thinking about doing the El Norte and the Primitivo. So going the Norte down Primitivo. So the Norte goes the north, the far north. It goes along the coast. It's one of the hardest ones because it's very mountainous. It's my plan. Yeah.
Ooh, that's
Yeah. Yeah. I just announced it to the husband. He said, "Have a good time." Again. Yeah. Yeah.
So we went with a wonderful group from the University of Bethlehem.
Oh, awesome.
Whom we had met a few of them when we were in Bethlehem. And they have a university, and it's the only Christian university in that part of the world. And so we had both college kids as well as few teachers, as well as on the board. So all ages right in the group we were on.
Fantastic.
But what really struck me is because they were a Catholic group, we were not, and every night, for those who wanted to go, you would go into whatever town you're in and attend church service. And at every church service we attend, it's all in Spanish, and at the end of the service, the priest would ask in Spanish, so who are the pilgrims? And a third of the entire group came up, and he would bless each and every one of us, and ask, where are you from? And it was just a meaningful touch.
It was extraordinary. That happened to me several times. In fact, I tell one story about it in the book, which is where the title comes from. One church service in Carrion de los Condes, and I don't know if you remember that one. There's nuns that sing in Carrion de los Condes, and I'm a flying nun fan from when I was a kid, right? So I'm big on nuns. I went to Catholic school. I'm like constantly taking pictures of, I call them penguin pictures, but I'm like constantly taking pictures of nuns when I travel. And so I was like, I have to see these singing nuns. So we go and to Mass, we did hear them, and it was really wonderful. And they asked the question, why are you walking? And I had this whole, I'm not going to tell you about it because it's in the book. You have to buy the book to hear that. But at the end of the Mass, the priest invites everyone up, but he does it in their native language. So he did it in Polish and in Greek and in German and in Spanish. And it was mind-boggling. He invited every one of them up, and then he would bless them in their native language, which was just extraordinary. And then after that, he said to us, the sisters have a gift for you. And so they gave us this little paper star. And when they gave it to us, they said, this is to remind you that you are the light, and that you are to share your light with the world, and that when all of us join together, we can light even the darkest night. And so that became, for me, sort of the anchor of the book, which is how do we spread light in the world? And so how do these people that I met spread light in my life, in my world? And then how do I go and do that for others? And so the title Estrellas means stars in Spanish, and it's from that story. Coincidentally, when I came back, in the midst of all of this kind of rough stuff we've been through in the last few years, I was struggling to figure out what could I do to bring more light, because I was really feeling like we were all drowning in darkness. And so I started a podcast about in January, and it's called From Sparks to Light, and it's stories of people who follow their spark and bring light to the world, and so in their own world, right? So I'm interviewing these amazing people that are just ordinary people who are like, volunteering in schools or working with AIDS patients, and it's just these hour-long interviews, and it helped me. It was very selfish, my intent of doing it, because it helped me realize, no, there's a lot of people out there that are doing really amazing things, that are spreading light in the same way that the sisters encouraged us to do. So if you're interested, the podcast is called From Sparks to Light. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts. And the new episodes launch on Thursday, and tomorrow's episode is about an interview with Carol Rathman. And Carol is the founding director of Forget Me Not Farm, which is this extraordinary farm in Sebastopol where they rescue farm animals. Carol was raised in San Francisco but loves farm animals, and they use the farm animals to help children that have been abused and neglected heal. So the kids come to the farm and they work with the animals and they work in the garden and they learn about gentle touch and how to care for things, and it's really extraordinary. It's really quite a program. So, for me, that sort of challenge to be a light, that's really cool. It really resonated with me. It really stuck with me, and and I've been trying since I've been back, even in these really dark days, to really look for light, because it's out there. Yeah. What else? What other questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
Just to comment that I love the name of your book.
Thank you.
Estrellas, and just for those who haven't been or haven't heard, it's interesting because they said that the early pilgrims would use the Milky Way to guide them to Santiago, which I thought was a beautiful story.
Yes.
But probably even more fantasy oriented. It also was a legend that the Milky Way was the dust from pilgrims walking to Santiago in the sky.
Yeah.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the, I joined my husband for about 8 days when he was out there in 31. But one of the things that Gary always says is, so in the past, Gary finished and went out to the ocean and then got on a bus and a plane and came home.
Yeah.
But those in the past, and way back, people had to turn around and go back.
Walk back. That's right.
It wasn't just a one way.
Yeah. So the early pilgrims would walk from Saint Jean to Santiago, and then they'd turn around and walk back.
They didn't get out of the train. There was no train.
There was no way to get back. They had to walk back the other way.
They actually walked from Germany or Paris.
Yeah. And I met people. I met a guy who walked from his front door in Belgium. I met another guy who walked from Germany, and they were just walking. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
I want to make a comment about spirituality, and then a couple things that I want to share is people walk and know that events happen, and they call it Camino magic. Something happens, and you're thinking about somebody, and they land in front of you. It seems like every day we had that kind of experience. And the guy I was walking with also was a social worker. He's my friend that I walk with. He described it not as Camino magic, but as Camino awareness. Mm-hmm. And somehow when you get into a certain state while you're walking, there's a kind of an awareness that comes about from the experience. And I attribute it to, we to walk 15 or 18 miles was usually about 6 hours a day. And I suspected at least 2 hours every day I walked by myself. Yep. You meet people, but I carved out about 2 hours where I would, and I called it sort of my meditation time. Mm-hmm. So if you think about meditating for 2 hours every day for 30 some days, your head gets into a space, right? It's sort of, and then you're around certain people who have an experience. So I think the magic of the Camino is, I call it a 30-day retreat. It was a time to be quiet. It was a time to be aware, to meet people. So I agree with the relationships, but the other part for me was kind of an awareness, very personal in that way.
Yeah.
Meditative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I walked alone a lot too. Yeah, it's funny, before I went, I don't think I would have imagined being okay walking alone for 3 hours. And I did that pretty regularly. Yeah. I'm going to hang around, so if you have any questions directly with me, I'll be happy to answer any questions. I want to just thank you for coming. Thank you for putting up with my Italian.